So hello, welcome to another episode of Things for Us. Today we're going to be looking at whether the 204 Series C-Class is the ultimate daily budget Benz. So we're going to have a little look at the history of the car, we're going to be looking around at what to look for, a little bit of a tour around the car, and we're also going for a drive, and I'm going to tell a little bit about the overall impression of how this car drives. So before we do any of that though, we're going to be going back in time a little bit to the early 80s, and we're going to be looking at why Mercedes felt there was a need for this style of car, which was originally labelled the Baby Benz. So Mercedes decided in the late 70s, early 80s that they needed a new small car, which was going to be called their Baby Benz, and this is what they came up with. This is a W201 190E. So Mercedes decided this formula was successful and decided to do another model, which came in 1993, the W202. Now this was the first generation that featured as the C-Class, so many people consider this to be the first C-Class and not the 190E. So Mercedes then built on this success with the W203, the second generation C-Class. Voiceover Stephen would have told you there, this is the fourth or third generation C-Class, depending on which is your viewpoint. So this is the 204, it came out in 2007. Now this is actually one of the very first cars. You do still see some cars from 2007, the 203 model, but this is one of the very first, the 204s. Now this particular one is a 220 CDI, so it's a 2.1, 2.2, depending on your viewpoint, again, diesel, so it's 4-cylinder turbo diesel. It's in the sport spec, and I think the sort of the middle spec you had an SE, which was more of a basic model, and the sport in the middle, and you have an elegance model at the top, I believe that was the way. I could be wrong about that though. So what does the sport model have? It obviously has the slightly sportier front bumper, AMG wheels. We can't also forget the bonnet, the little bonnet badge here. Now the 3-pointed start is actually built into the grille on this one. On some of the other cars, the SE, the elegance, it was still the 3-pointed star that stuck up on the bonnet, so a little bit of a difference there. That's the main way you can tell a sport model apart from the others. Inside you get half leather standard, we talk about that in a little bit though. We'll look around the interior, and overall it's just a really nice looking car. Now this particular one is in palladium silver. So this generation of C-Class came out in 2007. It also ran all the way through to about 2014 when obviously the 205 C-Class, the next version, replaced it. They did do a facelift in about 2011, which featured a redesigned front end. It also had an interior redesign as well, mainly on the fascia board. But for the purpose of today's video, we're just going to be focusing on the pre-facelift. This is more likely to be in your budget. Now, the 204 was a significant car for Mercedes, mainly because in the early 2000s, the quality of the cars dropped and Mercedes became a lot more obsessed with the budgets and accounting side of things, and the quality of the cars really did drop, mainly in the early 2000s. So Mercedes really wanted to get back on track and really wanted to get back to building really fantastic cars. And we'll come back onto this when we go for a drive, but this car is really well built. The build quality is fantastic. Even now, this car is 17 years old, done 86,000 miles, and yet it still feels absolutely solid. And that really is a testament to the build quality that Mercedes were trying to get back up to. So what are the things you should be looking out for? Now, I talked about build quality earlier, and one of the things that Mercedes still skimped a little bit on was sometimes the protection. So you've got the subframe in the rear. Now, not just on this C-Class, but on other models such as the R171 SLK, for example, they do rust quite badly. And this one, when we bought it, I used to work at Mercedes dealer, and this came as part exchange. My partner was looking for a new car at the time to replace a Land Rover, and this came in. I sent her a few pictures, she wanted it. All the cars had to go for the workshop and be checked over. And one of the things that was found was the subframe had basically holes in it, basically. It was like the bracket where the suspension mounts onto the subframe, for the rear suspension mounts on the subframe on there, it's bolted on. And imagine that's the mount, your subframe sort of here, and basically that was like the hole in the subframe. All around 3 sides of the suspension mounted had just rusted away to nothing, and they actually said the car was dangerous to drive. Now, Mercedes are aware of this issue, and if you do have a car like this with service history, not necessarily done by Mercedes main dealer, it could be done by an independent garage or your local garage, whatever, as long as the car has some sort of service and it's in okay condition, they usually should replace it. They shouldn't argue about that. You do have to go through a certain procedure. You have to then go obviously to Mercedes-Benz UK to get approved. And the other caveat is that if anything else or any bolts or anything go wrong with the car, or if they find something else and they take the subframe out, that's not going to be covered. All Mercedes will pay for is the new subframe and the labour to remove the old subframe and put the new one in. They won't cover anything else. Now, we did have an issue, I believe, on the brackets on the subframe, which again isn't covered, and we got that replaced, and that was about an extra £200. So we thought, well, £200 to replace the whole subframe is actually a bit of a bargain, really. Now, the only other issue with these cars is that they are getting a little bit older. One of the best bits of advice I always give when looking out for older Mercs is that the engines and gearboxes will last so long. This is cars that have done 85,000 miles. We know we've got plenty more years and plenty more life to get out of the engine and the gearbox and the drivetrain, provided they've obviously been serviced and looked after. The only problem that I always find tricky with this car and my B-Class is sensors and electricals. They always seem to have issues. I've had a couple of problems with the B-Class. So we had an issue when I bought the car, about a couple of months after I bought the car, that for some reason the parking light was on. I didn't realise the parking light was on. So a couple of days I looked out and suddenly noticed when the parking lights was on. Went inside, the lights were actually off. And one of the problems was that the light switch at the back had got a little bit of rust on the connector. Now that was cleaned off, we've never had any problems, but obviously it's not ideal to take your lights on or off. Now generally they aren't that expensive to put white. However, sensors can be £200, £300, £400, obviously plus the diagnostic fee, plus the labour. So they can be a little bit costly if you start getting a few days going wrong. Right, so let's have a look around the inside now. And the first impression you get whenever you sit in one of these cars is that everything's very well built, everything's well put together, all the materials feel really good. Everything is obviously very well spaced out. It's sort of where you would expect it to be. Nothing overly radical in this car, I'll admit, but everything's where you want it to be. It's very practical, but also looks very nice at the same time. One of my favourite features is this little cover here, which you can press and it pops up and puts the screen for the stereo. Now I quite like that bit actually being hidden, to be honest. I'm not a big fan of these massive touchscreens all manufacturers seem to be putting in cars these days. Perhaps just me, that's just the thing that I haven't actually used them that much. But I also quite like the fact you can pop it back down when you want to hide the screen. And the only screen you have there on display is a little screen just around the speedometer here. It shows your mileage, and you can go through various different options as well. Now, other little thing that we have done with this car is a little wire here, which you can see goes into the glove box, just comes out, looks a tiny bit untidy, but that is for so you can plug, you've got an aux socket in there, but that's for the aux socket. Now the aux socket is in the glove box, so we've bought a wire off of a particular website, and all it is a lightning socket for an iPhone and an aux socket the other end. You plug it in, and then you can actually have your music on or podcast or whatever it is you want to listen to while you're driving. So really useful stuff, and that was about £5 or £6. So finally, the seats are also really comfortable as well. I did a drive down to Heathrow in this car recently, about 2 and a bit hours for where we are, and I have to admit I got out and I just felt as comfortable when I got in. It's quite good that you've also got this support here, this little bit on the arm. You can move up and down to get extra lumbar support as well. So the seats in this car are partly electric, everything electric except for the lumbar support, and also you still have the additional lever, I can find it, to make the seat go back and forth as well. So I think we've looked at this car and talked about it long enough. Let's go and take it out for a drive, and I'll give you some of my overall driving impressions. So now we're out on the open road. How does this car feel to drive? Well, I have to admit, despite the fact it's 17 years old this year, it's an absolute joy to drive this car. I really actually enjoy driving it. But the strange thing is, I'm not too sure why I like driving this car. It's just got a nice feel to it. It's quite nice handling, but it's not what I call a sports car by any means. But nor is it a bad handling car. It rides relatively well, but it's not too soft. And the way it's just set up is actually quite good, to be fair to Mercedes. I obviously know what they're doing. So let's talk about engine and gearboxes. Now, this particular one is a 220 CDI, so it's a 2.1 or 2.2, depending on opinion, four-cylinder turbo diesel. And it really has definitely enough power. And I would say that it really does feel, it's got a good amount of pull to it. I don't think it's excessive. There was a V6 diesel as well you could get. But yeah, as an all-rounder engine, I think it's really good. Obviously, being older, a little bit more to tax here in the UK. And even though this is a 5-speed box, and I'm sort of used to 7-speed in my B class, I wouldn't say it's a terrible thing to have. I think the 7-speed is slightly nicer, but actually I don't miss it. I would happily daily drive this car if this was my own car. So in terms of things like fuel economy, I've had this car on average doing 49.5 is the highest I've ever got in this car, which I don't think is too bad for a 17-year-old diesel. If you live near London as well, this car is ULEZ exempt. It's one of the reasons that when we went down to Heathrow recently, we took this car, not my B class. Despite my B class being more having better fuel economy, having less emissions, it's not ULEZ exempt. So we ended up taking this car, which pollutes more and does less MPG, but it doesn't do that much less that it isn't worth it. You know, we'd pay £12 to drive into the airport and £12 to drive out. So the fuel economy saving wasn't that, it'd be less than that to fuel the car, put the extra fuel in. So it's one of those. Yeah, I won't go too much into ULEZ because that's a whole different tin of worms. I don't really want to get into there. So this particular one has an automatic gearbox as well. I believe you could get the 6-speed manual, or alternatively you could get this with a 5-speed auto. I believe some of the V6s came with the 7-speed, I believe. I'd have to double check that. And obviously the other end of the extreme for this car, you could also get the C63 with the 6.2 litre V8 if that's up your street. So obviously that's a bit of a different proposition, not only in buying the car outright, but also obviously the running cost of it as well. So yeah, not really fitting into our budget Daily Benz there. It's just an absolute joy to drive. Really enjoy driving this car. It's got such a nice feel to it. In my job, I used to work in motor trials, so I've quite a few different types of cars. It's amazing. Some of the cars that are a lot more expensive than this car didn't feel as nice. I've driven cars at 80 grand plus that didn't feel as nice as this. It's just something about this car. It's just got a nice feel to it. It's the type of car you could throw around if you wanted to down country lane. Probably be better with a petrol engine, you can rev a little bit more. But also, going back to our recent drive to Heathrow, you can drive this all the way to a 2.5 hour drive that we did, and you still feel refreshed when you get out of it. And that's the one thing I will say about Mercs, that they always feel really that ability to drive at a far distance and feel refreshed. Every single Merc I've ever driven, you always get that feel to them. They always feel the same. You can drive all the way, as I always say, back to the factory that they were bought in, and you'd be fine. You get out the other side and just feel refreshed. Now, don't tell my partner this, but as much as I love my B class, I do quite like this. Don't tell her that though. Sometimes Josh is making an excuse to go out in this car just so I can drive it. Or sometimes I'll be like, oh, well, you know, I just need to go and give it a run, has me out this week, just so I can have a drive of it. And it just, it's quite a big hill now. I never thought a diesel saloon could put a smile on my face, but somehow this does. I mean, it just picks up so well, and you can just throw it into the corners quite well. I've never driven this car too sporty, but actually, it don't half handle. So what would be my advice for buying a 204? Well, I'm going to practice here what I preach, because try and buy the best car that you can within your budget. Now, let's look at this car as an example. This car had one owner from new. It had pretty much Mercedes service history right up to the last couple. I think it had about 10 services over about 75,000 miles, which is fantastic. Mostly, say, done at Mercedes main dealer, but a couple had been done independently as well. Nothing wrong with that. So go for the best you can. Try and always find an example of service history if you can. It's always better just to know that the car's been serviced and looked after. I also have a look at things like tyres. Are there good brand tyres on there, or the budget's on there? You could also argue again, has it gone to an independent dealer? Has it gone to a local garage? Or has it gone to a Mercedes dealer? You can find that sometimes people look after a car, but they might not necessarily spend the most amount on it. Now, the only other thing that we've had to do is had 4 new tyres. It's also had the disc and pads all round done as well. So we didn't mind paying for that. I think that cost probably about £1,000 and all that. We didn't mind though, because it's got the car sorted and it's now a fantastic car. We both enjoy driving. Now, I don't drive this car that much, I must admit, but it is a really fantastic car to drive, and we'll come on to that when we go for a drive in it a little bit. So if you're in the market for a 204, what would I recommend you look for? Well, obviously subframe is going to be a big one of these cars. You need to make sure either the subframe's been replaced and you've got an invoice for that, or get the subframe checked over before you actually buy the car. Now, if you can get this on a ramp, you should be able to see the subframe fairly easily. You'll be able to see where it has been replaced if you haven't got any paperwork for it, or if it actually, in this case, it needed replacing. And obviously then you can take it to a dealer and try and get that sorted. I would also recommend you buy the best example that you can for your budget. Now, I'm going to practice what I preach here, because this particular one, before my partner had it, was one owner from new. It also had about 10 or 11 service history stamps in the book as well. Now, cars made before, I think it was November 2008 or something like that, actually have a service book with it. So again, if you're buying a car for sort of autumn 2008, you should have the service book with the car. After that sort of autumn 2008, then they did actually come electronic, so you can go to Mercedes, I believe, or call them up and try and check that service history. But every time a car goes to a Mercedes dealer, you will actually get a printout of that service history. So if it has been serviced by a main agent Mercedes dealer, you should have some sort of history with the car. If it hasn't been done with a Mercedes dealer, obviously you should have plenty of service receipts, and that's another way you can check the service history. So I suppose we should get back to the question I asked at the beginning of this video. Is this the best Daily Benz? Well, I like to think so. For the money that you can pick one of these up, and these sort of well, you can pick them up about less than £2,000 if you want one higher mileage, but a decent one, probably I'd budget maybe 4 or 5 grand. So I think it's a good amount of money. And let's just recap why I think that then. Well, because I think it drives so nicely, this car. I think it's packaged so very well. It's a nice size. It's not too big nor too small. This one is obviously a saloon, but also you can get the estate as well. Now, in terms of engine options, I personally think this 220 CDI is probably the best all-rounder if you want something that's good with performance, but also good on fuel economy as well. So I'd love to hear your feedback, your opinions, your experiences with a 204. Let me know in the comments if you had good experiences, bad experiences. We've had a very good experience with ours. However, let me know if you haven't had a good experience, maybe you've had a bad experience with it. I'll be intrigued to see what different viewpoints people have. So thank you very much for watching this episode of Stephen's Forwards. As ever, it's goodbye from me, goodbye from the C-Class, and we will see you next time. Goodbye. So did you know that Stephen's Forwards has its very own website and merch shop? Well, I do. Currently, we have stickers like so. £4 for small stickers. Large ones like this one are £6. We also have key rings like so, which are £6. All of these include postage as well, so there's no hidden costs on there. The price you see is the price you pay. Make sure you follow the link in the description below to show the support to the channel. However, if you don't want to spend any money, that's absolutely fine. Just simply hit the like button and make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Thank you very much.